Tom and Sarah had always dreamed of a quiet life, away from the city's noise and hurry. When they found the old cottage nestled beside the whispering woods, it felt like a dream come true. The cottage was old, really old, with thick stone walls and a roof that seemed to sag a little in the middle, like a friendly smile. Ivy climbed up the walls, and the garden was a riot of wildflowers, blues, yellows, and reds all mixed together. "It's perfect, Tom," Sarah had said, her eyes shining as she looked around. "Just perfect." Tom agreed. The air smelled clean and fresh, and the only sounds were the birds singing and the wind rustling through the leaves. It was a world away from the sirens and traffic they were used to. They spent weeks cleaning and fixing up the cottage, painting the walls a cheerful yellow and filling the rooms with their favorite things. It felt like they were building a new life, brick by brick. The cottage was a bit out of the way. The nearest town was a good 10 miles down a winding country road. Their closest neighbors were the Browns, an elderly couple who lived on a farm a mile or so away. Mrs. Brown had brought over a basket of freshly baked bread and a jar of homemade jam when they first moved in. "Welcome to Whispering Woods," she'd said, her eyes twinkling. "Hope you enjoy your stay. It's a peaceful place, mostly." Tom had chuckled. "Mostly?" "Well," Mrs. Brown had said, a little mysteriously, "there are stories, of course. Every old place has them. Don't you pay them any mind." And with that, she'd left, leaving Tom with a slightly uneasy feeling. The first few weeks were idyllic. Tom worked from home, writing code for a software company. Sarah spent her days exploring the woods, sketching the wildflowers, and reading in the sunny garden. They cooked together in the evenings, ate by candlelight, and fell asleep to the sound of crickets chirping. It was exactly the life they had always wanted. But then, things started to change. One night, Tom woke up and Sarah wasn't beside him. He sat up, rubbing his eyes, thinking she might have gone to the bathroom. But she wasn't there. He called her name softly, but there was no answer. A cold feeling crept into his stomach. Where could she be? He got out of bed and started searching the house. The living room was empty. The kitchen was empty. The back door was slightly ajar. He stepped outside, calling Sarah's name again, his voice a little louder this time. The only answer was the rustling of leaves in the trees. He felt a surge of panic. It was the middle of the night, and his wife was gone. He ran back inside, switching on every light he could find. The cottage, which had felt so cozy and welcoming just hours before, now seemed cold and menacing. He checked all the doors and windows, making sure they were locked. He didn't know what he was expecting to find, a burglar, a kidnapper. But the house was empty, silent except for the frantic beating of his own heart. Then, just as he was about to call the police, he heard a noise. A soft, shuffling sound coming from the back door. He grabbed a heavy wooden spoon from the kitchen counter, the only weapon he could find, and crept towards the door. He took a deep breath and threw it open. Sarah was standing there, just outside the door, looking pale and confused. Her eyes were wide and unfocused, and her hair was tangled. She was wearing her nightgown, and her bare feet were covered in mud. "Sarah!" Tom cried, rushing towards her. "Where have you been? Are you okay?" She blinked, as if she were waking from a deep sleep. "Tom. What's wrong? What time is it?" "It's after 3 in the morning. I woke up and you weren't there. I was so worried." Sarah frowned, rubbing her temples. I don't remember anything. I don't remember leaving the house." Tom helped her inside, leading her to the sofa. He wrapped her in a blanket and made her a cup of hot tea. "Just try to relax," he said. "Maybe you were sleepwalking." Sleepwalking. It seemed like the only explanation. Tom had heard of people doing strange things in their sleep. Maybe Sarah had just wandered outside without realizing it. But as he looked at her, sitting there shivering and confused, He couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. He watched her carefully as she drank her tea, trying to see if there were any other signs of distress. But she just seemed tired and disoriented. "I'm sorry I scared you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I really don't know what happened." "It's okay," Tom said, trying to reassure her. "Just try to get some sleep. We'll figure it out in the morning." He helped her back to bed and stayed with her until she fell asleep. He lay awake for hours, listening to the sounds of the night, wondering what had happened and what he should do. He couldn't shake the image of her standing outside the back door, looking so lost and confused. Sleepwalking or not, something wasn't right. This wasn't normal. He knew, deep down, that this was just the beginning. The next night, Tom couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned, his mind racing. He kept glancing at the clock, his anxiety growing with each passing minute. He told himself it was just a one-time thing, that Sarah wouldn't do it again. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was going to happen. He drifted off to sleep sometime after midnight, but his sleep was restless and filled with strange dreams. He dreamt of shadowy figures moving through the woods, of ancient stones glowing in the moonlight, of Sarah calling his name from a distance. Then, he woke up with a start. He looked at the clock. 3 a.m. Exactly. He held his breath, listening. He could hear Sarah breathing softly beside him. He reached out and gently touched her arm. She didn't stir. He closed his eyes, trying to convince himself that he was just being paranoid. Maybe she would stay in bed tonight. But then, he heard it. A soft creaking sound coming from the other side of the room. He opened his eyes and saw Sarah sitting up in bed. Her eyes were open, but they seemed distant and unfocused. She slowly swung her legs over the side of the bed and stood up. Tom watched her, frozen with fear. He wanted to say something, to stop her, but he couldn't find his voice. Sarah moved silently towards the door, as if she were in a trance. She opened the door and walked out of the room. Tom jumped out of bed and followed her. He watched as she walked down the stairs and towards the back door. He couldn't believe what was happening. It was happening again. He followed her outside, into the darkness. The air was cold and damp, and the moon was hidden behind the clouds. Sarah walked quickly across the garden and towards the woods. Tom hesitated for a moment, then followed her into the trees. The woods were dark and eerie. The trees loomed overhead, their branches like skeletal arms reaching out to grab him. The ground was uneven and covered in leaves and twigs. Tom stumbled and almost fell several times as he tried to keep up with Sarah. He called her name softly, but she didn't respond. She just kept walking, deeper and deeper into the woods. Tom felt a growing sense of dread. He didn't know where she was going, but he knew it couldn't be good. This wasn't sleepwalking. This was something else, something much more disturbing. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that he had to find out what was happening to his wife, even if it meant facing his deepest fears. The next night, and the night after that, it was the same thing. 3 a.m. Sarah would rise, eyes vacant, and head into the woods. Each morning, Sarah would return, her eyes glazed over, unable to recall her nocturnal wanderings. "I just feel tired," she'd say, her voice raspy. "Like I haven't slept at all." Tom tried to act normal, making breakfast and trying to engage her in conversation, but his mind was consumed with worry. He watched her every move, searching for any clue that might explain what was happening. He noticed that she seemed paler than usual, and there were dark circles under her eyes. She also seemed more distant, lost in her own thoughts. He tried to talk to her about it, but she just brushed it off. "It's probably just the stress of moving," she'd say. "I'm sure it will pass." But Tom knew it was more than that. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was taking over her, pulling her away from him, bit by bit. The nightly walks were becoming a terrifying routine. He was losing sleep, his appetite, and his sense of peace. The once idyllic cottage now felt like a prison, trapping him in a nightmare he couldn't escape. He started keeping a journal, documenting everything that happened each night. He wrote down the exact time Sarah left, the direction she went, and any details he could remember about her appearance and behavior. He hoped that by recording the events, he could somehow make sense of them. He also started researching sleepwalking, reading articles and books about the condition. He learned that sleepwalkers could perform complex tasks, but they had no memory of doing them. He also learned that sleepwalking could be triggered by stress, anxiety, or certain medical conditions. But none of it seemed to fit Sarah's case. Her sleepwalking was too precise, too consistent. And the fact that she always left at exactly 3 a.m. was too much of a coincidence. It felt like something was calling her, something ancient and powerful. Tom felt helpless, trapped in a cycle of fear and uncertainty. He knew he had to do something, but he didn't know what. He couldn't keep watching Sarah disappear into the woods every night, slowly losing herself to whatever force was controlling her. He had to find out what was happening, even if it meant risking everything. The lack of sleep began to take its toll. He felt constantly on edge, snapping at Sarah during the day, only to be consumed by guilt later. The joy they once shared was fading, replaced by a growing chasm of fear and misunderstanding. He knew he had to act, and soon. Driven by desperation, Tom started taking action. He tried locking the doors, bolting them shut from the inside, hoping to prevent Sarah from leaving. But it was no use. Each night, he would wake up to find the doors unlocked, the bolts undone, as if by an unseen hand. It was as if Sarah possessed an unnatural strength or knowledge in her sleep. He tried gently questioning her in the mornings, hoping to jog her memory. He'd ask her about her dreams, about anything she might have seen or felt during the night. But she always drew a blank. "I don't remember anything, Tom," she'd say, her voice filled with frustration. "It's like my mind is just empty." He even tried showing her pictures of the woods, hoping to trigger some kind of recognition. He showed her pictures of the trees, the plants, the animals that lived there. But she just looked at them with a blank stare. "They're just trees, Tom," she'd say. "I don't see anything special." Finally, he convinced her to see a doctor. He explained what had been happening, about her nightly walks and her lack of memory. The doctor listened patiently, then suggested that Sarah undergo a sleep study. "It's possible that she's experiencing some kind of sleep disorder," the doctor said. "A sleep study will help us to identify any abnormalities in her brain activity." Sarah agreed to the sleep study, but Tom was skeptical. He didn't believe that a sleep disorder could explain what was happening. He felt that something much deeper, much more mysterious was at play. The sleep study was scheduled for the following week. In the meantime, Tom continued to watch Sarah, his anxiety growing with each passing night. He felt like he was losing her, that she was slipping away from him, one step at a time. He started to feel like he was going crazy. He began seeing shadows in the corners of his eyes, hearing whispers in the wind. He jumped at every sound, his nerves constantly on edge. One afternoon, while Sarah was out, Tom decided to explore the attic. He hadn't been up there since they moved in, and he thought that maybe he could find something that would shed some light on the cottage's history. He climbed the narrow stairs and pushed open the attic door. The air was thick with dust, and the room was filled with old furniture and forgotten belongings. As he sifted through the items, he found a dusty old book. The title was barely legible, but he could make out the words "Ancient Rituals." A chill ran down his spine. This was more than just sleepwalking, he was certain of it. Tom spent the rest of the afternoon poring over the ancient book. The pages were brittle and yellowed, the ink faded, but he could still make out some of the text. It spoke of ancient gods, of rituals performed under the light of the full moon, of sacrifices made to appease the spirits of the woods. He found passages describing the Whispering Woods as a place of power, a place where the veil between worlds was thin. He also started researching the history of the cottage and the surrounding area. He spent hours online, searching for any information he could find. He discovered that the cottage had been built on the site of an ancient pagan temple. The land had been considered sacred for centuries, a place where people came to connect with the earth and the spirit world. He found local legends about strange occurrences in the woods, stories of people disappearing without a trace, of eerie lights and sounds, of a mysterious stone circle hidden deep within the trees. The legend spoke of a powerful energy that emanated from the circle, an energy that could affect people's minds and bodies. The more Tom learned, the more frightened he became. He realized that Sarah wasn't just sleepwalking. She was being drawn to something ancient and powerful that had been lying dormant for centuries. He felt a growing sense of urgency. He had to find out what was happening to her before it was too late. That night, Tom barely slept. He lay awake in bed, listening to the sounds of the wind and the trees, his mind filled with images of ancient rituals and shadowy figures. He knew that he couldn't wait any longer. He had to do something. He decided that he would follow Sarah the next night. He would stay awake and watch her, and when she left the house, he would follow her into the woods. He knew it was a risky plan, but he didn't see any other way. He had to find out where she was going and what was happening to her, even if it meant facing his deepest fears. He packed a flashlight, a knife, and a small first aid kit. He also took a notebook and a pen, hoping to document everything he saw and heard. He knew that he was walking into the unknown, but he was determined to protect Sarah, no matter what the cost. His love for her was stronger than his fear. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Tom lay in bed, his eyes wide open, listening to every creak and groan of the old cottage. He checked the clock every few minutes, his heart pounding in his chest. Sarah slept soundly beside him, oblivious to the danger that awaited her. Finally, the clock struck 3 a.m. Tom held his breath, waiting. He felt a surge of adrenaline as he watched Sarah slowly sit up in bed, her eyes vacant and unfocused. She moved silently towards the door, her movements like a puppet controlled by unseen strings. Tom quickly got out of bed and grabbed his flashlight and notebook. He followed Sarah out of the room, down the stairs, and towards the back door. He watched as she stepped outside, into the darkness. He waited a few moments, letting her get a head start. Then, he followed her into the garden. The air was cold and damp, and the moon was hidden behind a thick layer of clouds. The woods loomed ahead, dark and menacing. Tom took a deep breath and stepped into the trees. The darkness closed in around him, and the sounds of the night filled his ears. He could hear the rustling of leaves, the hooting of owls, and the distant howl of a coyote. He switched on his flashlight and shone it ahead, trying to pierce the darkness. He followed Sarah's trail, carefully stepping over roots and branches. He tried to stay quiet, but the leaves crunched under his feet, betraying his presence. He hoped that Sarah wouldn't hear him, that she was too far gone to notice. As he walked deeper into the woods, the atmosphere grew increasingly eerie. The trees seemed to close in around him, their branches like skeletal arms reaching out to grab him. The air felt heavy and oppressive, as if he were being watched by unseen eyes. He could feel a strange energy in the air, a tingling sensation that made his skin crawl. He started to see things out of the corner of his eye, shadowy figures moving among the trees. He knew it was just his imagination, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was not alone. He felt a growing sense of dread, a feeling that something terrible was about to happen. Despite his fear, he pressed on, determined to uncover the truth and protect Sarah from whatever darkness awaited her. He focused on the image of her face, remembering her smile, her laugh, the way she made him feel safe and loved. That was what kept him going, that was what gave him the courage to face the unknown. He couldn't lose her. He wouldn't lose her. The trees grew denser, their branches intertwining overhead, creating a canopy that blotted out what little moonlight there was. The air grew colder, and a damp mist clung to everything, making the ground slick and treacherous. Tom stumbled frequently, his flashlight beam dancing erratically as he struggled to keep his balance. The sounds of the woods intensified. The rustling of leaves became a constant whisper, as if the trees were sharing secrets he wasn't meant to hear. The hooting of owls grew louder and more frequent, their calls echoing through the darkness like mournful cries. And then there were the other sounds, the ones he couldn't identify, the scratching and scuttling noises that sent shivers down his spine. He tried to keep Sarah in sight, but she was moving quickly, her white nightgown a fleeting glimpse in the darkness. He had to push himself to keep up, his lungs burning, his legs aching. He felt like he was running a race against time, a race he couldn't afford to lose. His fear grew with each step. He imagined eyes watching him from the shadows, unseen creatures lurking just beyond the reach of his flashlight beam. He felt a primal urge to turn back, to run back to the safety of the cottage, but he knew he couldn't. He had to keep going, for Sarah's sake. He noticed that the trees were different here, older and gnarled, their branches twisted into grotesque shapes. The ground was uneven, littered with moss-covered stones and fallen logs. He could feel a strange energy in the air, a sense of ancient power that made his hair stand on end. He started to see symbols carved into the trees, strange markings that looked like they belonged to a forgotten language. He recognized some of them from the book he had found in the attic, symbols that represented ancient gods and rituals. He realized that he was getting closer to something that had been hidden in these woods for centuries. He could feel it in the air, a palpable sense of dread and anticipation. He knew that he was about to uncover the truth about Sarah's nightly walks, but he also knew that the truth might be more terrifying than anything he could imagine. The deeper he went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The woods felt alive, sentient, as if they were trying to warn him, to push him back. But he couldn't be deterred. He was too close. He had to know. He had to save Sarah. The air grew heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, a smell that was both earthy and unsettling. It was the smell of something old, something that had been buried for a long time. Suddenly, the trees opened up, revealing a clearing bathed in an ethereal, unnatural moonlight. Tom gasped, his heart leaping into his throat. In the center of the clearing stood a circle of ancient stones, their surfaces covered in moss and lichen. The stones were massive, each one taller than a man, and they were arranged in a perfect circle, as if placed there by giants. The moonlight seemed to emanate from the stones themselves, casting an eerie glow over the clearing. The air crackled with energy, and Tom could feel a tingling sensation on his skin. He felt like he had stepped into another world, a place where the laws of nature didn't apply. Sarah was standing in the center of the stone circle, her arms raised towards the sky. Her white nightgown billowed around her, making her look like a ghost. Her face was illuminated by the unnatural moonlight, and her eyes were wide and unfocused. She seemed to be in a trance, completely unaware of her surroundings. Tom wanted to shout her name, to run to her and pull her out of the circle, but he was frozen in place, paralyzed by fear and awe. He had never seen anything like this before. It was as if he were witnessing something sacred, something that was not meant for human eyes. He noticed that the symbols carved into the trees were also etched into the stones, glowing faintly in the moonlight. He recognized them as symbols of ancient gods, gods of the earth and the sky, gods of life and death. He realized that this was a place of power, a place where the ancient spirits still roamed. He watched as Sarah began to sway gently, her movements becoming more rhythmic and fluid. She started to chant in a language he didn't understand, a language that sounded both ancient and strangely familiar. Her voice was low and melodic, filling the clearing with an eerie beauty. The chanting grew louder, the energy in the clearing intensified, and Tom felt like he was being pulled towards the circle, drawn in by an unseen force. He fought against it, clinging to the edge of the clearing, desperate to maintain his grip on reality. The moonlight intensified, bathing the stone circle in an almost blinding light. Tom shielded his eyes, struggling to see what was happening. He knew that something extraordinary was about to occur, something that would change his life forever. He just didn't know what it was. He felt a wave of nausea, a sense of disorientation that made him stagger. He knew he had to do something, but he was too afraid to move. He was trapped, a helpless observer in a scene that was unfolding according to its own ancient and unknowable rules. The chanting reached a crescendo, a deafening roar that seemed to vibrate the very air around him. The unnatural moonlight intensified, bathing the stone circle in a blinding white light. Tom squeezed his eyes shut, shielding them from the glare. He felt a searing pain in his head, as if his brain were being fried. When he opened his eyes, Sarah was gone. The stone circle was empty, the unnatural moonlight faded, and the clearing was plunged back into darkness. Tom stared in disbelief, his mind struggling to comprehend what he had just witnessed. One moment, Sarah had been there, chanting and swaying in the center of the circle. The next moment, she was gone, vanished without a trace. He stumbled forward, his legs weak and shaky. He ran into the stone circle, calling Sarah's name, his voice cracking with desperation. "Sarah! Sarah, where are you?" But there was no answer. Only the rustling of leaves and the hooting of owls. He searched the circle frantically, his flashlight beam dancing across the stones. He looked for any sign of her, any clue that might explain what had happened. But there was nothing. It was as if she had simply dissolved into thin air, absorbed by the ancient stones and the powerful energy that permeated the clearing. Tom felt a wave of despair wash over him. He had lost her. He had watched her disappear before his very eyes, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. He ran to the edge of the clearing and shone his flashlight into the woods, hoping to catch a glimpse of her white nightgown. But the trees were dark and silent, offering no answers. He called her name again and again, his voice growing hoarse with emotion. But his cries were swallowed by the darkness. He sank to his knees, his body trembling with exhaustion and grief. He didn't know what to do. He didn't know where to turn. He had come to these woods to protect Sarah, to save her from whatever darkness was consuming her. But he had failed. He had watched her vanish, and he was powerless to bring her back. The woods seemed to mock him, their silence a deafening reminder of his loss. He was alone, lost in a nightmare he couldn't escape. He closed his eyes, tears streaming down his face, and whispered Sarah's name one last time, a desperate plea lost in the vastness of the night. He had failed. He had truly, irrevocably, failed. The first rays of dawn began to filter through the trees, casting long, distorted shadows across the clearing. Tom, numb with exhaustion and despair, continued his frantic search. He circled the stone circle again and again, his flashlight beam sweeping across every inch of ground. He peered behind the massive stones, hoping to find some hidden passage, some secret doorway that might lead to Sarah. He ventured further into the woods, calling her name until his voice was raw and scratchy. He stumbled over roots and branches, his clothes torn and muddy. He ignored the thorns that scratched at his skin, the insects that buzzed around his head. He was driven by a desperate hope, a refusal to believe that Sarah was truly gone. He searched for hours, his energy waning, his hope dwindling. The woods remained silent and indifferent, offering no clues, no solace. He found no footprints, no signs of a struggle, nothing to indicate where Sarah had gone. It was as if she had never been there at all. He started to doubt his own sanity. Had he imagined it all? Had he succumbed to some kind of madness, brought on by sleep deprivation and fear? Was Sarah still at the cottage, safe and sound, while he was lost in a delusional nightmare? He considered turning back, going home to see if she was there. But he knew, deep down, that it was no use. He had seen her vanish. He had witnessed something that defied all logic and reason. He knew that Sarah was gone, taken by whatever force resided in these woods. He pressed on, driven by a sense of duty, a need to find some kind of closure. He owed it to Sarah to find out what had happened to her, even if it meant facing the darkest secrets of the Whispering Woods. He expanded his search, venturing further and further away from the stone circle. He climbed over fallen logs, pushed through thick undergrowth, and waded through shallow streams. He searched every nook and cranny, every hiding place, every possible escape route. But it was all in vain. The woods remained empty, silent, and unforgiving. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting its harsh light upon the trees, Tom finally collapsed, his body giving out. He lay on the ground, exhausted and defeated, his tears mingling with the damp earth. He had searched everywhere, but Sarah was nowhere to be found. She was truly gone. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow, leaving him breathless and broken. He had lost her forever. He was alone. Completely, utterly alone. As the sun reached its zenith, casting a harsh, unforgiving light upon the clearing, Tom dragged himself back towards the stone circle. He didn't know why. Perhaps he was hoping for a miracle, a sign that Sarah was still alive. Or perhaps he simply couldn't bear to leave the place where she had last been seen. He stumbled into the circle, his eyes scanning the ground, searching for anything at all that might offer a clue. The stones loomed over him, silent and impassive, their moss-covered surfaces glistening in the sunlight. He walked slowly around the circle, his gaze fixed on the ground, his heart heavy with grief. Then, he saw it. On a mossy stone, near the center of the circle, lay a small, gold ring. Tom recognized it instantly. It was Sarah's wedding ring. The ring he had given her on their wedding day, the ring she had worn every day since. He knelt down and picked it up, his fingers trembling. The gold was cold and smooth against his skin. He stared at it, his mind reeling. It was the only tangible evidence that Sarah had ever been there, the only proof that he hadn't imagined it all. He clutched the ring tightly in his hand, his tears mingling with the damp moss. He stayed there for a long time, kneeling beside the stone circle, Sarah's ring clutched tightly in his hand. The sun climbed higher in the sky, the shadows. Later that day, Tom stumbled out of the woods and made his way to the nearest town. He reported Sarah missing to the police, telling them everything that had happened. He described her nightly walks, the stone circle, the strange energy in the woods. The police listened politely, but they were skeptical. They searched the woods, of course, but they found nothing. No signs of a struggle, no trace of Sarah. They interviewed the Browns, the elderly couple who lived on the nearby farm, but they knew nothing. The police concluded that Sarah had probably wandered off and gotten lost. They suggested that she might have suffered a mental breakdown or had an accident. They promised to continue their search, but Tom knew that they didn't believe him. They thought he was crazy. Tom returned to the cottage, a broken man. He couldn't bring himself to leave. He stayed there, alone in the old house, haunted by memories of Sarah. He replayed the events of that night over and over in his mind, searching for some clue, some explanation. But there was none. He spent his days reading the ancient book he had found in the attic, poring over the faded text, trying to decipher the secrets of the stone circle. He learned about the ancient gods, the rituals, the sacrifices. He learned about the power that resided in the whispering woods, a power that could consume the unwary. He started to believe that Sarah had been chosen, that she had been drawn to the stone circle by some ancient force. He wondered if she was still alive, trapped in some other dimension, or if she had been sacrificed to the ancient gods. He would never know for sure. He continued to live in the cottage, year after year, his hair turning gray, his face etched with sorrow. He would often visit the stone circle, leaving flowers on the mossy stone where he had found Sarah's wedding ring. He would sit there for hours, talking to her, telling her how much he missed her. Sometimes, he thought he could hear her voice whispering in the wind, a faint echo of her laughter. He knew it was just his imagination, but it gave him comfort. He never remarried. He never loved another woman. Sarah was the only one for him, and he would never forget her. The mystery of Sarah's disappearance remained unsolved. The whispering woods kept its secrets, guarding them jealously from the outside world. And Tom was left to live with the unanswered questions, forever haunted by the memory of the woman he had loved and lost in the shadows of the ancient stone circle. Sometimes, late at night, he would wake up to the sound of footsteps outside his door, a soft, shuffling sound, and he would swear he could hear Sarah calling his name. But when he opened the door, there would be nothing there. Only the whispering.